Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. And Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
As we still try to get our bearings here in this new year, it may take some getting used to. Just getting the small things right. It's kind of maddening sometimes, like writing 2018, not 2019 on documents. Welcome and thank you again for supporting the most widely watched source of Carolina business policy and public affairs, even if we can't get the date quite right yet. The idea of a new start does bring hope and optimism to what 2019 may actually usher in, but then again, hopes were pretty high exactly a year ago, too. We'll engage our expert panel in just a moment. And later on, UNC Greensboro's boss, Dr. Franklin Gilliam. Stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Joe Waters of Capita, John Silvia of Dynamic Economic Strategy, and special guest Franklin D. Gilliam, Jr., Chancellor of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro.
Happy New Year. Welcome to our program. I can still say Happy New Year, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's not out of sorts. I'm glad to have you both here. John, let's start with you. So in the context of a new year, for this collective Carolinas, what should be our New Year's resolution?
Well, Chris and I, you and I have been friends for a long time, and
use that term pretty liberally, that idea.
I've lived here since 2002, and the one thing I constantly get frustrated is visibility. We have content in the Carolinas, but trying to get more visibility on a regional and national scale, I think, is a real challenge. It's nice to have the Belk Bowl here. I think that does raise visibility recently during the college football season. But there's one commercial on TV that I kind of am intrigued. It's the Mercedes-Benz van commercial.
The Sprinter van?
Where, yes.
That they make in Charleston.
At the end of the commercial, the gentleman comes out from underneath the van that's elevated, and he comes out and says, I would like to have the van made in both gas and diesel and made in South Carolina. To me, that's visibility. That's really neat that you're raising the fact that we are doing some interesting things. You know, the Boeing in Charleston area was phenomenal. The success in both Raleigh and in Charlotte. But we have content. It's getting that visibility that I think is the challenge for us.
Joe, what would a New Year's resolution you'd like to see us adopt?
Yeah, Chris, thanks. I think one of the challenges we face in our culture right now is that it's just so much is going on. There's so much noise. There's so much in terms of what's happening on Twitter and social media and whatnot, that my New Year's resolution, what I'd like to see for all of us, is to take more time to be quiet and to be still, to listen to one another more deeply, more thoughtfully. It's critically important for our public life, our common life. I think it's good for business. It's good for our health. We know that. We'll pay more attention to our children and to our families in the new year if we take a little bit more time to be a little quieter in our daily lives.
We're going to come back to that, because that's part and parcel to one of the other issues we want to talk to about, this civility that we've seen a lack of, at least over the last couple of years. But John, before we start to get a little bit metaphysical, John, let me come back to 2019. So here we have, by the numbers, and I'm telling you something you already know in your sleep, this idea that if we make it to June in a formalized economic expansion, it will be the longest expansion since the mid-1800s, which is the longest expansion in contemporary U.S. history. Do you expect that we're going to make it to June or the summer and this expansion will continue?
Yes, I do expect that we will make it. The jobless claims numbers, which is a leading economic indicator for me, still remain fairly low. They are creeping up. When I look at consumer confidence and consumer spending, 2/3 of the U.S. economy, that continues to be pretty solid. Recently, we got a very strong employment report. Those fundamentals are there. I think from the Federal Reserve's point of view, they will be very cautious going forward raising interest rates. So they may not raise rates at all in the first half of this year. So yeah, I think we'll make it.
Do you think that the markets have been very volatile and very, very reactive
Right.
to the political speak that's gone on in the country, and certainly the trade in U.S. and China, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think the markets are telling us something different, though?
I think the markets are telling us a little bit of confusion. And while, Joe focuses on the civil dialogue, I think on the political level, on the international level, there's just a lot of back and forth that creates a lot of uncertainty on trade, on our relationships in Europe. That creates a lot of volatility in the marketplace. Again, when you look at the S&P 500, over 1/3 of the revenues come from activity abroad. That international dialogue has to be positive, a lot less acrimonious, and again, going back to Joe's point about civility.
So, Joe, then, Dr. Silvia just queued it up for you. How do we get to a constructive civil dialogue that's more than just academic prowess and intellectual wit? That I won the day, I won that argument, I made it more salient than you. You've got to relent to what I think. How do we get to that point where it's really constructive?
Chris, I think in some ways we have allowed the sort of political and cultural elites to dominate the dialogue. And what I would like to see is more democratic dialogue across the Carolinas. How can
with a small d?
With a small d, yeah, absolutely. How can we hear from more people, the average people, the folks who are getting up every day, who are going to work, who are picking their kids up from school, who are facing childcare challenges, they're anxious about the future of work and the future of their job and whatnot. How can we hear from them? How can we engage them in both public dialogue, political dialogue, but also just civic discourse within their neighborhoods and communities? And it really comes down to starting to build more social capital, to build more social networks, to encourage people and to give them the tools to sit down and invite their neighbors to dinner, to be able to cross the street, so to speak, and to have a conversation with somebody who's different than they are, different than their family.
And sorry to put it this way, Joe, you don't think we're so far down the road of cynicism that can't be unwound?
Well, I think we're getting pretty far down the road of cynicism, and certainly we're concerned about that. But I think we have to, if we care about the American experiment, right, and if we are committed to its future, then we have to at least be hopeful enough to renew these conversations that are so critical for our civic fabric.
John, as a practitioner of economics, markets, as you hear Joe describe this idea of outlining a way to have a collective dialogue that really is constructive, how do you look at it? How do we get to that place?
Well, again, to the extent that people feel socially or politically isolated, their activities are going to be counterproductive to the economy moving forward. The economic system relies upon relationships between individuals. There was a fascinating piece in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago about how Southerners tend to just drop in and say hi to somebody in their neighborhood as opposed to somebody in other parts of the country which shall go unnamed. And it was a fascinating little article, and that was my experience. I've had neighbors come over and just say hi. It's like, okay.
Did it scare you, being from Boston?
Well, yeah, it scared me a lot. Like, what are you doing here? But again, I've had people bring over cookies, and it's been a wonderful experience for my wife and I.
So Joe, I don't want to unpack this too far. It's certainly a dialogue worth trying to unpack, but it succinctly then, how do we really do it? There seems, and I'm sorry, I'm answering your question for you, I don't mean to do it, but there seems to be a lack of humility in the dialogue itself.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of a very sort of archaic and some would say prudish word, virtue, right? We have to cultivate in ourselves virtues of humility, of prudence, of discipline. These are things we want to see in our children, right? And we know that that the virtues are going to help our children be successful in the workplace and beyond. But we also have to cultivate them for ourselves, right? And how do we be humble? Well, we reach out. We actually do it, right? It's a habit, and just like any other habit, if we do it enough, we will become humble, right? If we want to be just people, we will act with justice, and we'll do it consistently, and we'll create those habits. And that's really what it's about. How can we reach out? Well, we have to practice reaching out. We have to do it. We have to stop in on the neighbor and hear what they have to say, not just caricature what they have to say on Facebook.
Yeah.
And if I may interject, for example, I still remember the lesson in one of my undergraduate courses in logic and philosophy where argumentation meant that you entered into an argument with someone willing to listen to their ideas as if it's possibly true, as opposed to arguing in the sense of you're wrong, I'm right, this is why I'm right. So argumentation, in undergraduate classes is taught to listen to what possibly could be right about the other person's
Why do you think that, were you going to say something?
Yeah, we have to listen magnanimously, right? We have to stretch to the great things.
Do you think kids are taught that?
Listening.
Are children taught that?
I don't think
Are
that
young
at all.
people taught that?
No, I think they're too concerned about teaching to the test. I mean, that's the catchphrase, and I think it's true. And so it leaves out a lot of the social emotional development that's so critical for kids to learn, and that's going to ultimately ensure their success in the workforce and beyond.
I suspect that our guest has, at the top of a university, has an opinion on this. We might have to ask him about that as well.
Sure.
Guys, stay with us on the program. Coming up on this program, Lynn Good is the chairwoman and CEO of one of the Carolina's largest companies, that is Duke Energy. She will be a guest on our program. Also, Molly Spearman, who is the Secretary of Education in South Carolina. Interesting times in the Palmetto State around education, as well as trade, which directly impacts the ports. And Jim Newsom, our guest from the Ports Authority on this program once again. He'll be here coming up in the next few weeks as well. So the Carolinas seem to be a tale of two cities right now. On one hand, we've got commerce and economic development and business, as you just heard, population growth, all been exceptional for many years. On the other hand, though, you would think because of that, things like education would follow almost in a linear fashion. However, education's been more of a flashpoint than anything else for leaders and communities in this region. Joining us now is someone with a very deep bench of experience in both public policy and education. He is UNC Greensboro's Chancellor, Dr. Franklin Gilliam. Chancellor, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to, we talked before the program, and I was going to ask you where UNC Greensboro fits in the 17 campus, but we were just talking about young people, kids, students, young leaders not having those talents of listening first with humility before they enter into an argument. Would you describe it that way?
No. I would describe it as we're the problem, not the kids.
And what does that mean?
They're learning and they're modeling adult behavior.
Do you see that on the campus at UNC Greensboro?
No, in fact, I see the kids as much more involved and engaged in the civic fabric, as you called it, than we recognize. But they're doing it at the micro level. And they're not doing it through institutions and traditional organizations. And I don't think we've come to grips with how they live. And they are skeptical about institutions, if you think about their lives.
Skeptical, not cynical?
I think they're skeptical. I think I think they have reason to be skeptical. If you think, it's funny, the students get younger as we get older. And, my Vietnam War jokes don't go over well in the classroom. And, you're talking about kids who came to awareness with President Obama. It's a different kind of socialization. And it was a period of divided government, and then acrimonious government and political discourse. And institutions, this is part of what was Donald Trump's appeal, institutions were regarded with a high degree of skepticism because it was a question of whether or not they could produce results. Higher education, by the way, was also one of those institutions called into question.
You know, I know we weren't going to start there, so let me go back to the beginning and ask you, where does UNC Greensboro fit into the 17 campus of the UNC system, and specifically in North Carolina?
Well, I think that we are the engine of future prosperity in North Carolina. 77% of our students stay in North Carolina when they graduate. 93% of our students are from North Carolina. And they go on to be your nurses and teachers and accountants and insurance salesmen and small business persons, and music educators, and go down the list. And, you know, I'm sure we have a few hedge fund managers who are our alumni, but these aren't the kinds of students that have a future in that. They are going back to their communities or coming to Charlotte or the Triad or staying in or down to RTP. And they're really the middle class. We like to say we're remaking the middle class in North Carolina.
John, question?
Well, the question, the recent article in Wall Street Journal talked about the ACT coming to a conclusion that 40% of the students that they interviewed were not ready for math in colleges. How do you look at that issue, and what does UNC Greensboro do in terms of helping students get on board?
So let me sort of take it first from a more conceptual level. And you raise the question of access, right, versus excellence. And I think that there becomes sort of a false dichotomy. A lot of these kids are bright enough, they just haven't been prepared. We get many kids from the small towns around North Carolina and some of the big cities. We can get a lot from here in Charlotte. And they're not getting the kind of first-rate education that you're seeing at. And by the way, this is what always strikes me about these kinds of conversations. We know how to do good education. We've got a lot of excellent K through 12 schools, and many of our children have gone to them. We know what it takes, but we don't see that distributed broadly. And so a lot of these kids come from under-resourced schools. They don't have AP courses. They don't have a ton of advisors. And so I'm not surprised that they are not as prepared as we might like them. However, we recognize that, and this is why we've been given recognition and money by the Gates Foundation. We're part of their Frontier Set. Higher Ed, Ed Trust has noted us, because we know that these students need supports. You know, the ACT report called it remedial. I don't know so much if it's remedial. I think it's more guidance. A lot of kids don't know how to study, don't know how to write an essay. And to your point about teaching to the test, that's part of the reason why. So we really have to balance off these concerns about having standards. And by the way, I think excellence and opportunity and access can coexist. We just have to, you used to say in football language, coach them up. And it's what we do. And to do that, well, it's unfunded, unfortunately, but we provide a lot of support for these students. And I think that that's why we've gotten recognition. But it's not just us, and there's several other schools that do a good job of it too. So the question is, would we rather have a more educated population or not? And are we going to make the investments to ensure that? Now, to be fair, North Carolina has issued one large bond since I've been here, and there's another one under consideration that higher ed will get some piece of. And so I think the support, but I think we've lost the public debate about the value of higher education. Simple fact of the matter is, people with graduate degrees, undergraduate degrees, have higher lifetime earnings.
Right. Joe?
Yeah, I'm really interested in how universities, particularly public universities, operate in the public interest, right? And certainly there's a commitment to the education of undergraduates and graduate students who will stay in North Carolina or make contributions anywhere in the world. What's the role of UNCG and the university system as a whole in terms of shaping a civil public dialogue?
That's a good question, and that's interesting. I like to say in our campus, if you can't have vigorous civil debate at a university, where in the society are you going to have it? So if as long as the speakers, for example, meet the criteria, which all speakers have to meet, and any group that wants to come. We've had a wide range of speakers. We had Dinesh D'Souza. You know, if you didn't want to hear what he had to say, don't go. And people didn't go, but a couple hundred people went. And that's our purpose. Now, I know we had, for example, a debate about taking a name down off of a building, which we did. In my first year, we had extraordinarily civil discussions with our Board of Trustees, appointed, by the way, by primarily a Republican legislature, where we really debated it and we studied it. And we did what universities ought to do. And what we decided to do, what the board decided to do, was to build an exhibit, and by the way, it's first rate, it's world class, explaining all of Aycock's life. Right? History is told by those who tell it,
Yeah.
right? And so we tried to show everything. And so if you want to see that, you can. You go up and it's there. But for our students, I'll give you a story. I taught at UCLA for 29 years. And the bust on the elevator to the building that I was in was the Nobel bust of Ralph Bunche, the first. And it sounds kooky, but I felt great about that. My best friend just retired from the University of South Carolina, and they had a statue of Jefferson Davis in the middle of the campus. It matters. And you have to explain why. Now, and we had a very civil debate, and our board studied it. We did what academic institutions are supposed to do. And we had vigorous discussion. We had people who didn't agree, but the majority of the board thought it was in the university's best interest. And so what we did is we have this exhibit. If you want to know about Governor Aycock, that's the place to go.
Do you have confidence that Chapel Hill will get there with the silent sand debate?
I have no idea.
You follow it? You follow it?
A little bit, but not much. I don't know. I mean, I know what the broad strokes are, but I don't have much detail.
Let me go back to you. You used the term a couple times about access. And online education has exploded. I think that's probably an understatement. Between 2015 and 2016 grew more than the previous 3 years, and I think that growth is continuing. Give us a sense, does online education supplant the feet on the campus? Does it add to? Does it grow the overall amount of students that are learning? How does it interact with traditional education?
You know, it's interesting. I've been at this 36 years, and I don't know, every decade or so, there's something that comes along that's going to be the end of the university, bricks and mortar. Right. Right. First, it was MOOCs. Right, the open source courses that were going to be, Harvard professors were just going to be teaching and you're going to get the content for free. Bad business model, it didn't work. Then the for-profits were supposed to put the end to us. Of course, the profit motive destroyed them. And then online education, and we read a lot about it. Students, if they can get it wherever they are, you have to take the product to the consumer is the argument. Two things. One, there will always be bricks and mortar, and two, online education is a valuable tool for some part of the student population. And we find that even our residential students take at least one online course while they're there. So there's and we've devoted a lot of energy to it. We have a student body that has older students. We have a lot of veterans. We have people who have families and can't come to campus all the time. And so the online courses are terrific for them. Now, we all know that there's real questions about completion rates with online education. They're lower.
Dramatically lower?
Significantly, non-trivially lower. Okay. And that is of concern.
And that's across the, that
nationally,
would be with any school?
Nationally. Okay. And so that is a concern. The thing that troubles me about it is that there are a lot of for-profit companies that are selling universities all kinds of platforms. And it's not the platform that matters, I don't think. I think it's the content. So you have to make sure you have good instructors and good course content.
We're out of time, guys. Thanks for being on the program. We literally have a minute left. Jerry Seinfeld popularized this idea of comedians in cars
Yes.
getting coffee, and you have this thing called Just Saying, G,
Yeah.
where you spend time with the students. We have 30 seconds left. How does that work?
Well, it was that Seinfeld
Was it?
concept. That was it. And it was two things. I just drive around the campus and pick students up. I have GoPros on the cart. It's a jump car that we call the students name the G-Whip. And I take them where they want to go. We have some programs devoted to particular student populations, veterans, international students, go down the list, Greek students in Greek life and so on. And so I interviewed the police dogs the other day.
No stone unturned.
No stone unturned. I'm clearly willing to make a fool of myself.
Well, it probably endears yourself to the students as well as to the board. Chancellor, thanks for being on the program. Please come back and we unpack a little bit more of this
Absolutely.
dialogue.
Thank you.
It's good to
Thanks
see you.
for having me.
Joe, Happy New Year. Good to
Happy
have
New
you
Year.
here.
Thank you.
John, always nice to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris Woody, and we hope your new year and your weekend are good. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.